Let's just let people on. Just give them a chance. Give a few minutes.
No problems. Well, we can't start without them. Hi, we can't start without them.
Exactly. You said it. We can't start without the peeps.
Without guests, we can't start.
Okay, they're starting to come through. Okay.
Did Mommy get in?
I don't know. Ask Sarah Malka.
Just remind me to start off these things before I talk.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining at Pirkei Avos Shiur Le'iloi Nishmat Avraham Chaim ben Eliezer Yaakov Zecher Tzadik Livracha and Goldie Miriam but Avraham Chaim Zichronah Livracha. May they both intercede on high on behalf of all of us. Over to you, Dov.
Thanks, Kai. Good evening. Perek Beis, Mishnah 8, according to our text, but in others, it's Mishnah 7. It's another Mishnah of Hillel's teachings. And let's have a look what Hillel says. We'll first just read through the Mishnah. Hillel says, U'haya omer, marbe vasar, marbe rimal. The more flesh, the more maggots. Quite a thought. Marbe nechosim, the more possessions. Marbe daga, the more worry. Marbe noshim, the more wives, a woman. Marbe cheshofim, witchcraft. Marbe shvachos, marbe zimah, the more maidservants, the more lewdness. Marbe avodi, marbe gozel, and the more manservants, the more theft. That's section 1 of the Mishnah. Then he moves on to section 2. Marbe Torah, the more life. The more study, the more wisdom. The more counsel, the more understanding. The more tzedakah, the more peace. And then finally he moves on to the third segment of the Mishnah, about kana shem tov, kana lasma, one who gains a good reputation. I don't know if we manage to get to the third section tonight. Let's have a look. The Mishnah is clearly divided. Hillel is saying 3 groups of things. Let's take the first 2. Don't even know if we'll get through all of them, but clearly he's holding up the 4 negatives or the 5 negatives. One of them, marbe basar, marbe nechosim, property, noshim, shvachos, maidservants and manservants. 5 things that if a person is marabe, if he's marbe, the problems that they bring. And then he enumerates 4 that have positive spin-offs. Torah, yeshiva, eitzah, counsel, and tzedakah. So it's fascinating. What is Hillel saying? He's holding up these 5, and if you count man and maid servants as one, it's mamish 4 against 4. Hillel is holding up, you've got 4 on this side. If you merabe them, if you seek a lot of them, what the spin-offs, and then on the other hand, the positive. And the whole mission is about murabe or marbe, somebody who seeks to increase something. Is marbe basar, marbe nefas in his property, marbe his servants, marbe his wives. He's a man with a lot of appetite. He wants to be marbe something. And also on the other side, he's talking about marbe, spiritual things. He seems to be saying that we are born to be driven. Man is born with an appetite to be marbe, not just to get through. He's born with a natural instinct to marbe. You only got a choice. Where are you going to put the focus? Where are you going to look for your godless, your ribui, your harbe? Where does a man look to find that? But he does crave to be outstanding in something. Why is it that he craves that? It sounds almost, we'll see from Rabbi Yonah, it sounds that it's part of the craving. There's an instinct for life itself. But Hillel is not necessarily saying that the first 5 are Averas. He's not saying that. Polygamy was mutar according to the Torah. It's only a very late rabbinic innovation, about 1,000 years ago, that the famous Rabbeinu Gershom introduced his chidush, banning that which the Torah had allowed. And yet, so he's not saying things that are asur. He's saying that there are lifestyle choices that a person makes. Either they're going to be material or they're going to be spiritual. Where do you go to feel vital, to feel alive? The drive for success, for prosperity, is part of the instinct to be alive, to feel vital, to feel great, to feel a lot of life. It's called Bakoshas HaChaim. It's the instinct of every human being, not just the instinct for survival. This is another instinct. All animals have the basic instinct of survival and propagation of the species. Man is either loaded or gifted, depending on how you look at it, with another instinct. It's an instinct to make something out of his life, to be marbe. That's what Hillel's addressing. So marbe Chaim, the basic instinct for life by a human being, is more than just survival and propagation of the species. Once you have that, you need something much greater. They call it a meta need. Hillel called it a marbe. We need to feel the energy of being alive in a grand way. Sound and feeling. We want it to last forever, and we have a neurosis about it ending, and about our vulnerability, and about our being erased. So Bakoshas HaChaim drives everything we do. And Hillel is just saying, let's have a look at it. Let's think for a moment. Where should we go with this Bakoshas HaChaim? And first he holds up the natural ones that you're born with. The ones that started earliest in your life, before you could think, precognitive. As you were born with a craving just to survive and to grow bigger physically, to have sustenance. That's the pleasures and the koiches of the body. That's what when a human being starts off, that's his beginning drive. That's where he starts off yearning for something, to grow bigger. So the first of the marbes that Hillel addresses is you're going to be marbe basar, the drives of the flesh, the koiches of the flesh, the physical. That's the first thing. He means the whole host of them, how much attention you put on it. You want to be the biggest on the block, also physically, the strong. That's the first of the drives, to master your world physically, to go from being a single cell to becoming the biggest physical specimen on the block. It's the first of the draft, to be the strongest in there, fastest on the field, the strongest at the gym. These are basic drafts. Marbe Basa. So Hillel says the problem with that is that all that is going to happen with all this flesh is Marbe. It doesn't last. And in fact, it's self-defeating. There's more maggots. There's more maggot food. That's all you're working for. In other words, certainly it doesn't work for Olam Haba, for eternity. And even in this world, it's only of a limited solution. And he says man has to take a long view because we are mostly spiritual. We are mostly neshamas. Only a small part of us is the body. Vastly neshamas. And therefore we're in it for the long term. So it says if you would stop there and that would be your only attempt at godliness, your translation, your interpretation of the need for greatness would only be frozen at the immature physical, which probably brings a child at least to adolescence. That form of success. He says stunted. These solutions, that success brings dysfunction. And he doesn't only mean that, he means much of all the koiches and all the pleasures that go with the body, they bring dysfunction. They're only good if they're held to a limit. For example, alcohol is very good for kiddush. It's very good for a l'chaim. It very easily lends itself to dysfunction. And similarly, all the other pleasures. So Hillel says, if you're going to be marbe that's you started off, that's your first interpretation of your need for godless, for success is going to be a physical one. That's closest to home. It's not going to get you anywhere. He said, let's look at that. Then let's move on. So what's the next one? Beyond adolescence. So he realizes he's not going to be the strongest in the gym, but at least he can be the richest in the block. And let me just quote you a line of Rabbi Adam Choshev. What is a person thinking when he overindulges his merabe in the koiches and the drives of the flesh? Ki alidei hatanug va'idum Chaim Yosef. Rabbi Yonah says those words. His reason for doing it, his need, is he thinks that that's where he's going to find this expression of life with a capital L, that he is instinctively driven, a greater life, more of life. So he figures, he thinks that his success lies in the natural world to which he's been accustomed. And he says, that's just going to be embarrassing because it's just more maggots. Terrible. Then let's move on. So he thinks, okay, in work, in business, maybe he'll be merabe in that. He'll make a ton of money. Hillel says, that's my ben nechosim. And you know what happens? My ben nechosim. Let's say you're successful and you are blessed with plenty. It comes at a price. My ben there's lots more to worry about. People think that if they could solve that second problem, the problem of income, of sustenance, of wealth, it would solve all the problems. As Rabbi Dessler points out, often you're simply trading a set of problems. Until now you had the problems of a person without money. Now you've got a rich man's problems. Very often, rich man's problems are more expensive problems and bigger problems. It doesn't make the problems go away. So as a solution, if a person's going to say, he's going to interpret his need for life in its magnificence as a yearning to succeed in that area, but he says, as a one-dimensional thing, again, it opens like the rest of Olam Hazeh. The whole of Olam Hazeh is like that. All the solutions, the Gemara says, it's like a hay. It's wide open at the bottom. It's so easy just to fall through the floor. And why? Because they're only a piece of the story. They only address a certain bandwidth of needs. And therefore, they can't be the ultimate solution. They lend themselves to abuse, to overuse, and then they're no longer helpful. They're meant to be like salt and like spice. gives flavor to life. It supports what you're really trying to do. It supports the main dish. In and of itself, becomes self-destructive. Truth is that it's known, it's studied and documented. Most often, people who won huge amounts at the lottery destabilized, dysfunctional. Why? Because it takes an incredible amount of maturity to understand that that's really only meant to be the spice. Your life has to be about something else. Dad loved the story of the poor man, penniless, at the robot, begging for alms, and the wealthy fellow drives past. He says to him, tell me, how much do you need so that your problems are solved? What do you need that will... So the guy thought for a minute, $100, I'm away. No problem. If I could get $100 right now. So the fellow, I don't know if he gave him the money or not, but he said, well, look, who's poorer? He said, me, he's already got millions in the bank. He said, my problems won't be solved unless I've got at least double that. I need at least a couple more million to solve all my needs. So who's poorer? The more you have, the greater your appetite. Vilna Gaon said that's the nature of life. That's what Hillel is saying. The nature of this world is it's salty water, says the Gro. It's quenching your thirst with salty water. Obviously, it's only going to make you thirstier. So Hillel is he's leading us through them one stage at a time. First developmental stage is basic body and its needs and drives flesh. Then economy. That's the next level of the hierarchy, the famous hierarchy of basic needs. And Hillel is saying there's an art to keeping things simple because they don't provide solutions. Sometimes the more properties you have, it's called pizur hanefesh. The Chaim says, he said that the really pious man prayed to be saved from pizur hanefesh, a scattered mind. And they asked him, what's a scattered mind? He said, owning a property at every port, that's a scattered mind. Because you're never here. You're never satisfied in your daled amos. You're always worried about the economy in China, in America, in Europe. Well, today it's a global economy. It does affect everybody. But one has to avoid being of scattered mind. My ben nechosim, that next level is not going to provide the solution. My ben noshim, sometimes a person says, okay, it's not me, it's not my money, body, my money, maybe it's my wives. Although it's interesting, the Aruch HaShulchan notes that even though the Torah permitted polygamy, not one sage in the entire Talmud is ever recorded as having two wives, which is phenomenal observation. Aruch HaShulchan says, not once. So he says it was never considered a smart thing to do. You can imagine the bickery. That's what it says, my bicker shopping. The more wives, the more witchcraft, but also the more attention on the spouse or on this other agenda to solve the basic issues in life. It's also got its limitations and it comes with its sting. That's the third level. The fourth level, man's really made it. How does he show that he's made it? In the old days, he walked in the street, he had a whole entourage of servants, maidservants, manservants. He also discarded that one. He said, that's not going to be the solution. They all cause more problems than they possibly can solve. That's what Hillel has said. So now in the first 5, he said, well then, why did Hashem give us this instinct for more than survival and propagation of the species? What is it that we're meant to achieve? What is it, this piece of life that we want? And where do we find it? And that's the second half of the mission. Hillel says, on the other hand, marbe Torah, marbe Chaim. And note, he leaves this part, the positives, for the second. First is process of elimination, where you're not going to find solutions or solutions which lead to more problems. It's not considered a solution if it generates more problems. That can't be the meta solution. None of those. And those are the most natural ones. That's what you're born with. You're born relating to your growth in terms of physical. The next level is you need to solve the problem of financial stability, and then spousal stability, and then creating a homestead. These are natural. And there's something beyond that. When you move beyond all that, and you see those cannot ultimately provide the solution, and they're not the deeper need for life that a human being, a mensch, is gifted with. None of them. He has to look beyond that, something that wasn't easily tangible at birth. And that's Marbe Torah. He says, you were created to be Marbe something. You weren't created just to get by. You were created to try and attain a godless, some form of greatness. What is that? He says, Marbe Torah, Marbe Chaim. If a person is Marbe his Torah, his study of Torah, his Torah, that Ya'arich V'Yamav. He says, if a person becomes absorbed, says Rabbi Yonah, let me read you his words. And I don't think we're going to get much beyond this evening. Zeh hadavar, keneged ma she'omar. In the beginning he said, Marbe basar, if you look to the flesh and the solutions of the flesh, they lead to decay, they lead to dysfunction, they lead to harm. He says, now the opposite of that, alidei amal haTorah. If a person immerses in his Torah, he struggles in his Torah, he chains himself to the standard, you think, oh, you would have never. He says, opposite, Ya'arichun Yamav. He's going to find life and length of days in that. Mabe nechasim, mabe da'aga, the more property. It's good to have a lot of property, but it shouldn't own you, you should own it. Mabe nechasim, if a person makes that his meta focus enough, mabe da'aga, it's going to unwind him. It's going to disravel him through worry. Da'agas hanachosim, the worry about all his possession. Listen to these words of Rabbi Yonah. Mekatere shenosav, that worry is mekatere shenosav. It takes away his quality of life and his length of life. Again, we're not saying that one should not have much property. He should have much property. He should be the balance. It shouldn't become his meta identity. Da'agas haTorah, on the other hand, the worry, the one who's worried that I didn't understand the sheer property, I didn't understand the piece of Bezchus, I didn't get it. Afi daga gedola, to a person who's studying Lamavin, to a person who's a thinking person, that's a big worry that he can't understand it. Kasher yachshav b'halacha ad yom hadavar davar, to get the idea out correctly is a big worry, but that worry is not going to lead to any harm. It's not going to disravel him. It's going to unravel him. It's not going to unwind him. There's no dysfunction that will ever come from Marbe Torah. So that's what he's holding up. The second part of the Mishnah, he says as follows: Hadaiga, worry, constant worry, kelois halev. It's a very strong expression, kelois halev. It finishes off the heart, chas v'shalom. Constant worry. De'aga, constant worry, kelois halev. Finishes off the heart. Doeg b'Torah. If a person worries about Torah, it's only going to add to his length of days, his quality of days. Somehow Rabbi Yonah is teaching us something. Locked up in the words of Torah, there's a lot of life. It's not only that you get a bracha of life from above, but there's a quality of life that comes from the Torah. Yiras Hashem, if your fear, your worry comes from a spiritual pursuit, because that's how you identify yourself, that worry, he says, is going to expand your life, both the length of days, Be'ezat Hashem, and the quality of days. And in fact, this is why we were born with this great appetite for life. Born to interpret it correctly, to focus it correctly, to focus it on something that's only going to enhance the quality of life. And so Hillel is teaching that, ironic, the most vibrant people alive, truly, says Hillel, people who are alive intellectually, alive thinking through the wisdom, and particularly the wisdom of Hashem. those who chain themselves to Shteni. You think it takes hours of rigorous thinking over minutiae. What are they worried about? When you get lost in those thoughts, Marbe Chaim, it seems not to be the key to life. It's counterintuitive. You think life is running around shouting and making more noise. Not the humble guy sitting and studying. Hillel, the great Hillel, the sage, who left us with so much wisdom, locked up in each word in Pirkei Avos. It says, Marbe Torah, Marbe Chaim. You have a need to Marbe Chaim, to find your life source. And the place that one finds it is in Torah. One aspect of this we've spoken about before. Hashem is the Makor HaChaim. He's the source of life. And the more attached one is to Hashem, the more attached he is to life itself. There's no other way. Explains the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Baal HaTanya, the most profound way of attaching to Hashem. Hashem is not a corporeal. You can't touch him. How do you get close to him? Davening to him is one way, but it has a limitation because the davening only comes from the stirrings of your heart and your soul, which is limited by your experience and by your development. Studying Hashem's Torah, on the other hand, thinking his thoughts, you're attaching through his medium. The Torah is his thoughts. It's way beyond our thoughts. When one attaches through that and one passes Hashem's thoughts through his mind, he's closer to Hashem than in any other way possible in the world. Hashem, so to speak, is thinking his thoughts, his Torah, through your mind. Those are the words of the Baal HaTanya. It's an incredibly profound idea. And therefore, Marbe Torah, Marbe Chaim, because it channels you, it keeps you attached directly, the closest, most profound, most meaningful, most powerful expression of life itself through attachment to Hashem. As we say when we take out the Torah, V'atem hadveikim b'Hashem, those who are attached to Hashem through the Torah. That's what we say it when we take out the Torah. Chaim, you have real life to this day and every day. It's the key to the life. I'll just conclude with this. Meiser of Pinkas said, he said, often, Yeshiva Bocha, anyone who's studying Torah, you have your Daf HaYomi, you have your Shir. When do you know that you've mastered a piece of Gemara and you can move on to the next piece? How do you know? I think I said, he gives you a sign. He says, when you reach a point in your learning where you say, have a smile and say, with a smile, I got it. Then you've mastered the piece, you can move on. If it didn't bring a smile to your face, you didn't get that moment of, that unbelievable pleasure that any student of Gemara, Rishonim, Achronim knows. If you didn't get that, you didn't get the chap of it, you didn't get the pleasure of it, you haven't got peace. Atem hadveikim, Hillel said, the way to attach to life, to the source of life, is locked up in the holy words of our Torah. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. That was truly powerful and thought-provoking. Thanks very much and have a good night.